Good day. Today we're going to talk about a Genettian analysis of Peter Berry. So Gerard Genett is one of the most prominent narratologists since Roland Barthes that has been Gerard Genett, so whose work has its focus not to tell itself to speak, but how it is told, which is to say the process of telling itself. So what is meant by this distinction will become apparent if we consider six particular areas which Janet discusses. So in what follows is six basic questions about the act of narration and sketch under each the range of possibilities identified by Janet, which with some supplementary categories. So question number 1 is the basic narrative mode mimetic or diegetic. So mimesis means showing or dramatizing. The parts of a narrative which are represented in a mimetic manner are dramatized, which is to say that they are represented in a scenic way with a specific setting and making use of a dialogue which contains direct speech or show telling. So mimesis is a slow telling in which what is done and said is staged for the reader, creating the illusion that we are seeing and hearing things for ourselves. And by contrast, diegesis means telling or relating the parts of narrative which are presented in this way are given in a more rapid or panoramic or in short summarizing way. And the aim is to give us essential or linking information as efficiently as possible without trying to create the illusion that the events are taking place before our eyes, that the narrator just say what happens without trying to show as it happens. The writer used two modes in order to form a strategic reason. This is partly because an entirely mimetic novel would tend to be infinitely long, and an entirely diegetic one could hardly be more than a couple of pages and would read like a plot summary. So in short, mimesis and diegesis need each other and often work together so that the join between them can be difficult to discern exactly, but it is easy to see how the fundamental they are as the building blocks of narrative. Question number 2. How is the narrative focalized? So focalization means viewpoint or perspective, which is to say the point view from which the story is told. There are many possibilities, like for example in external focalization, the viewpoint is outside the character depicted so that we are told only things which are external or observable, that is what the characters say and do, as these being things you would hear and see for yourself if you were present at the scene depicted. And in the opposite, eternal focalization is the focus on what the characters think and feel, so these being things which would be inaccessible to you even if you had been present. And last is the zero focalization or omniscient narration. So a zero focalization or third person omniscient narration is a common form of third person narration in which the teller of the tale, who often appears to speak with the voice of the author himself, as it assumes an omniscient or all-knowing perspective on the story being told, diving into a private thoughts, narrating secrets or hidden events. Number 3. Who is telling the story? The author or the authorial person, but not necessarily in his or her own voice or persona, is the one who is telling the story. It is one kind of narrator, that the kind that often goes with a zero focalized narrative or a third person omniscient narration, is not identified at all as a distinct character with a name and a personal history, and remains just a voice or a tune which we may register simply as an intelligent recording consciousness or a mere telling medium which strives for neutrality and transparency. And while the heterodiegetic narrator is one who is not a character in the story that he or she narrates but an outsider to it. Number 4. How is the time handled in the story? Narratives often contains reference back and reference forward, so that the order of telling does not correspond to the order of happening. So sometimes the story will flash back to relate an event which happened in the past, and that is called flashback or analeptic, and such parts of the narrative can be called analeptic, or from the word anap, anaplysis, which literally means backtake. So likewise, the narrative may flash forward to narrate or refer to and anticipate an event which happens later. Such parts of the narrative can be called proleptic, from the word prolepsis, which literally means a foretake. Question number 5. How is the story packaged? So stories are not always presented straight. Often writers make use of framed narratives, or also called as primary narratives, in which they contain within them are embedded narratives that are also called secondary narratives. So you have to notice that there are primary narrative that really just means that the narrative which comes first rather than the main narrative, which in fact it usually isn't. While the secondary narrative is the one which comes second and is embedded into the primary narrative, and the secondary narrative is usually the main story. And the question number 6 will be further discussed by Jemima Jane Sabelina Mabilin along with her report. And that is all. Thank you. Ako nasabtan ko report